Well, here we are. I came from Australia. I was interested it's very interesting to come to America in kind of episodes, you know. I didn't come here for many, many years, and I came back in, you know, I've been here in the 70s at the height of rock and roll madness and doing all that. Then are you allowed to swear here, or is this a family show? Okay, well no, I basically was fed up with it all and fucked off. And went to India, and I'd never been a hippie. Everybody else was being a hippie. Well, I was busy working my butt off, making sure that music was happening and, you know, all that other stuff. So I went off and wandered the world and was thoroughly irresponsible and caught up on my hippie moments at the end of the 70s. And anyway, I found myself ending up in Australia, and I finally came back to America in 2010. So I was kind of interested to see what had changed. I didn't think that much had changed, to tell you the truth, but I must give you one simple impression from a foreigner that's come here, and that is that the place is looking a bit tacky, guys. It looks like you need to spend some money on it. You know, in a kind of sense, you know, the infrastructure. I went on the Staten Island ferry, and I went on the subway and driving down interstate freeways and stuff. It all looks like you should be spending some money there. I know you're spending lots of money on wars, but maybe some you know, a bit of money on roads and subways and bridges and etc. And people might not go. I mean, it's just it is actually. I mean, that was genuinely what I felt. I thought, shit, the roads have all got potholes in them. It's kind of bumpy, you know. I drove out to Ohio, it was like a 10-hour drive, you know, and you know, the car was rattling along there. It was a brand new car, beautiful car that Charlene owned. She drove us to Ohio, and I was like, yeah. Anyway, that's just a by-the-by little observation from somebody who loves the place and hadn't been here for 3 years. So, anyway, I'm a writer. I've been, since I left the music business, what really made me leave the music business was, I've worked for the Greatful Dead for a few years, I've worked for the Stones, I've worked with Pink Floyd, I've worked with the band, all kinds of different people, and it was like, one day I woke up and I thought, you know what, you spent so far, at that age, I don't know what I was, 34 or something, you spent your whole life helping other people's fantasies kind of come true. Like working on other people's dreams, you know, which were, fair enough, I was sharing the dream, they were my dreams too, but essentially they were other people's dreams, you know, the dream of being in a band that turns into being the Rolling Stones, or being in a band that turns into being the Grateful Dead. And I said, like, you know, well, what's your dream, you know, what is it that you want to do with your life, you know? And ever since I've been very young, about 15 really, I'd wanted to be a writer, and I'd fucked around with it and kind of had a go at it, but I'd never been very serious about it. And so at the end of my time with the Grateful Dead, I decided it was time for me to, first off, to go off and experience the whole kind of counterculture thing of, if you like, being a hippie, quote, quote, and having a few years doing that, and also to follow my own dream, which was to be a writer. So I did that. I've been writing now for 30 or 40 years, and now, of course, everybody that's in this room has probably read one or two, if not 20 or 30 biographies or autobiographies or books about the music business. Now, I must say that for my own taste, 90% of all the books I've ever read about the music business, I'm going to be kind here, are just dreadful trash. I wonder who the fuck they're aimed at. I mean, we all know that everybody, you know, fucks like bunny rabbits and does too much drugs in the music business, but that's really not enough information to sustain a book. There does need to be a little bit more than just that in a book about a band or the music business. So most books about the music business that I've read, I found very disappointing. Some, of course, I found to be absolutely staggering. You know, Danny Sugarman's book, No One Gets Out of Here Alive, about the Doors, you know, was just superb, and there are many that are really good. So I mustn't just, you know, I'm not blanketly dismissing all books about the music business by any means. But I would like to think that a book about the music business, first off, is relatively well written, just because, you know, trees get cut down and turned into paper and printed and bound and shipped all over the place, and it just seems such a chronic waste of resources to print something that's just trash, you know, and waste trees. So hopefully, you know, books are reasonably, if not well written, and also that, you know, that they would appeal to slightly more than our baser instincts that might actually be quite sensitive and a generous view of what goes on. So one of the weird things about my book is, other than taking Bill Graham to task, I don't actually badmouth anybody. I'm not really a believer in this, you know. A tour manager, when you get to the level of the music business that I was in, a tour manager holds many secrets. There are many things that I know that I will never tell anybody, from my wife to my sons to anyone, and I'll go to my grave knowing them. Things about Garcia, things about the Stones, things about all kinds of people. Discretion, the thing where you know about things about other people and you never ever talk about it to anybody, is a vital element in the art of being a tour manager. So my book doesn't have, I'm afraid to say, any, you know, shocking revelations, but it does deal with a lot of aspects of the music business which other books I find haven't dealt with. So I thought, you know, I'd give you a little taste of it. I'm not going to sit here and read 95 pages of my book to you, God forbid. But there is a little bit I'd like to read to you, because I'm sitting on a stage here with people that I've known for 40 years almost, right? From Big Brother. And I knew Janis, and I also knew Garcia, and Janis and Garcia, in one certain magic moment, lived about 5 doors away from one another in Marin County in California. And there's a little bit in my book that talks about the kind of person that Garcia was in his house, you know, living in his home, and the kind of person that Jerry was, and what that Janis was, and what her house was like. And just to kind of fit you into the picture, as it were, Altamont, which was the free concert that happened in San Francisco on December 6, 1969, and happened, was a huge disaster of epic proportions. The Rolling Stones got blamed, although it was unfairly blamed. It wasn't particularly their fault. It was a combination of reasons that turned what could have been a wonderful thing into a disaster, one of which was just the date. It was December the 6th. It was bitterly cold. None of us had even thought about the weather. It was bitterly cold, and it was also in kind of high chaparral country, almost desert. That's the worst place to hold a rock and roll show. There are other things that made it as bad as it was, one of which was the stage was no higher than this stage is. Now, if you imagine having a stage this high in the middle of 300,000 people with the Rolling Stones on it, you can imagine what the security issues that automatically occurred were, and so on. So there was a whole range of things that went wrong. It was a nightmare. And Garcia, the Rolling Stones, immediately that concert was over, they left in a helicopter, they went back to their hotel, they grabbed their bags, they left from the hotel to the airport, and they left America. They were out of America 4 hours after Altamont finished, gone. And I was left to basically deal with the shit, which I thought, you know, needed to be done. It's one of the things about being a tour manager, of course, you know, you love the fact you've got this great band, you know, the greatest rock and roll band in the world, and all that. And you love to bask in all the glory of great shows and whatever, and have all the perks of the position when things go well. But often, you know, when things go badly, people behave badly. I was of the opinion that, you know, when things go badly, you've got to stand up and deal with them. You can't just run away from them. So I stayed to deal with the aftermath of the Rolling Stones concert, which was, you know, there were lawsuits totaling something like $25 million, which was a lot of money in 1969 and stuff like that. So I stayed to deal with that, and I had nowhere to stay, and I was actually staying in Mickey Hart's barn. I was living in a barn, and Garcia came up to Mickey's place, a little ranch in Nevada, just north of San Francisco, and saw me there, and he told me, look, listen man, you can't stay here, you know, because it was known as the Grateful Dead's ranch, and there were cops and the press and all kinds of people at the gate. It was all getting very difficult. So I was smuggled out of there by Jerry, bless him, and he took me to his house, to live in his house, which was very, very kind of him. And I also should say, of course, that the idea of a free concert in San Francisco originally came to the Rolling Stones from the Grateful Dead. So Jerry felt a bit embarrassed about it all, you know, what had originally was going to be this wonderful thing turned into a complete shit heap and was just a disaster. And I think Jerry felt certainly concerned, if not slightly guilty, about the fact that it had all gone wrong. So he invited me to stay at his house, and this is a little bit from my book about going to stay with Garcia and meeting Janice, who lived only four doors down the road from Jerry. So I hope you like it, and I hope it gives you a kind of a taste of what this book is like, and I shall try and read it well for you. And it's called, this chapter is called Jerry and Janice. I should just say one thing here. This book has got all short chapters. It's not designed for short people, but it's designed for people who have, if you like, short periods of their life in which to read books. It's my belief that the days in which you sat around and read, you know, for 5-10 hours are now gone. People read for 15 minutes maybe before they go to sleep. They might read for 10-20 minutes on the train going to work, on a bus, stuff like that. But people don't read like we used to in the old days, you know, at great length. So my chapters are like little sandwiches. You can have one between your main meals. And yeah, here's the chapter that's about two people who were very, very central to my life and who I loved, and who now have passed on, but we remember them fondly. So this is called Jerry and Janice. I was surprised when we arrived at Garcia's place to find that he lived in a perfectly normal house, in a perfectly normal street, intertwined with massive redwood trees. Perhaps I'd expected him to dwell in some strange version of Gandalf's garden, or a peculiar hobbit's cave. His house was set back from the road and had a driveway beside a front lawn that needed mowing. There was no front fence. The garden was open to the road. It was a 3-bedroom house that I guess had been built in the early 50s. The back garden, which could be seen through the kitchen window, had a bit of a vegetable patch and a kid's swing. It was a perfectly domestic home in a perfectly American street. It was cool. Garcia introduced me to Mountain Girl in the kitchen, and she peered at me with evident disapproval. "Want a coffee?" she boomed. I sat in a chair as Garcia disappeared. A blonde-haired little girl asked me my name. This was Mountain Girl's daughter, and we shyly spoke. She asked me, "You a musician like Jerry?" I told her that I looked after musicians, and she nodded sagely. The coffee arrived. "If you're looking for Garcia, he'll be in the front room," Mountain Girl said. I retreated to find Garcia. He was seated in an elaborate pedal steel guitar of the type featured on a million country songs, and his feet were an array of different pedals, and he was wearing headphones. In front of him, perched on a small coffee table, was a TV. The volume was off, but a cartoon flickered on the screen. Garcia remained preoccupied with what he was doing, his back to me. His hands were moving across the strings of the pedal steel, and his feet were moving about. Even his knees were pushing against various levers, and there was absolutely no sound. He was deeply engrossed in a silent symphony. I wandered back to the kitchen where mounting girls informed me in a strangely masculine voice, "Garcia's learning pedal steel. He sits in that room for hours, been in there for weeks, every minute he gets." Garcia had been playing for barely a couple of months, but he'd already advanced considerably and had recorded an overdub for Crosby, Stills and Nash's Teach Your Children. He was clearly immersed in a blessed and private dance, so I didn't interrupt the man. I smiled at the mounting girl, she smiled back, and I decided to go for a walk. Most of the dwellings in this idyllic Marin County street were made of redwood with shingle roofs. I wandered down the road and maybe a dozen houses along from Garcia's, I came across an expensive-looking place. Parked in the driveway was a Porsche, painted in the most extravagant psychedelic colours. I knew immediately that the car belonged to Janis Joplin. Photos of it had been in the newspapers and magazines. It was a famous car like John Lennon's psychedelic Rolls Royce. I walked up the drive and banged on the front door. Lo and behold, a sober Janis opened the door, looked at me and yelled, "Fucking Sam Cutler, what are you doing here, man?" I explained I was staying with Jerry. With a smile and a hug from Janis, I went inside. Garcia's house had barely any furniture in it, whereas Janis's house was stacked with the stuff. Styles and periods were mixed together in a mad psychedelic melange of colours. Expensive but overwrought, gaudy and visually incoherent. In some ways, it was the perfect mirror of its owner. We picked our way to a corner of the large living room where Janis liked to hang out, and she asked if I'd like a drink. We sat on a luxurious spread of cushions and caught up. The first topic of conversation was Altamont. I should just say here, Janis Joplin didn't play at Altamont. She wasn't even invited to. Janis took a swig of her drink and held forth on a subject on which everyone on the West Coast had an opinion. "You dumb brick," she started. "What the hell were you doing working with Scully and Emmett?" They were the two managers of the Grateful Dead. "What the hell were you doing working with Scully and Emmett? I knew them in Haight-Ashbury and I've known them through all kinds of trips, and while they're great guys, they couldn't organise shit. Even the Grateful Dead don't want them. They've been partying too long, they're shot. They're as much use as a bull's ass in fly season." Janis then hit me with a belligerent question. "How come you decided to play in the fucking desert? Who told you that was a good idea? Rot Scully?" She cackled wickedly. "You didn't really think they'd let you play in the city of San Francisco, did you? You guys must have been dreaming." She paused for breath. Sitting there in a multicoloured caftan and pink boa, Janis looked like a benevolent psychedelic witch. "Yeah, man, it was a complete fuck-up and I didn't hear from nobody. Nobody asked me to play." I shrugged my shoulders. "Well, consider yourself lucky. It was a fucking nightmare and you were blessed to have missed it. You'd have hated it anyway." I asked Janis what she was doing now, and she completely ignored my question. "Anyway, man, that's Albert Grossman. Anyway, man, Albert didn't want me to do the gig, and you know what, man? He was right. It would have been shit. He knew it would be shit. Everybody did." Albert Grossman was her manager. Janis was a curious lady, radically different from any woman I'd known. While I stayed with Garcia, she and I became friends. I'd pop in and see her, we got drunk a few times, we talked, and I listened to the demo track she was recording in the garage with her new band. I stayed out of her bed, and we stayed friends, although whenever we got drunk, she'd be sure to remind me of Madison Square Garden and my throwing her out of the Rolling Stones dressing room, as she described it. Janis hid her insecurities behind an act, what the Italians call menefreghismo. A menefreghista is basically someone who doesn't give a fuck. Janis cared so deeply and passionately about so many things, but found it incredibly painful. To protect herself from her own feelings and vulnerabilities, she wore a shield when she was in public, a fuck you attitude that was macho and vulgar, but at heart it was totally false. Sing the blues, dress outrageously and have a big mouth. Most men loved Janis for it, but I couldn't stand that phony act. Thankfully, in private, she was usually a whole other person. And because I've worked with the Stones, she rarely laid that shit on me. Relieved of the pressure that comes with having to be the life and soul of the party, The private Janice could hang out and be herself. The rough as guts bravado was replaced by sensitive soulfulness. She spoke quietly and with emotion. When you were alone with Janice, you got the feeling of being given all of her. She could be intense, but she could be what I'd call also emotionally demanding, and when you were with her, she made you feel special. On several different occasions over spliffs and drinks, she would describe her latest perfect lover, some guy she'd met in the previous few days. She always seemed to have a new man in her life, and yet she remained chronically insecure. I really wasn't that keen to hear her intimate stories, but I grew fond of Janice. She was the kind of woman who made it easy for you to feel that you were close to her. She was very Texan like that. Janice would have made a wonderful mother. All of the men in the San Francisco music scene worshipped her for the generosity of spirit she possessed. The lady really knew how to party too. When Janice got down though, it was downright depressing. We'd sit around and she'd tell me her romantic tales of lasting love and some wonderful man, and I'd do my best to sound interested and be supportive. Then she'd turn around and announce the bastard had left her asleep in bed and gone off without saying goodbye. Finally, after even more drinks, she'd be practically sobbing, and I'd find myself giving her a sympathetic cuddle, stroking her hair and agreeing that most men were indeed absolute bastards. If we had another drink or two, Janice would probably nod off with a glass in her hand. I'd then recover what was left of the drink, pull a cover over her, close the door behind me, and make my way back to Garcia's. I've always thought that a man can get sex anywhere in this world, but friendship's harder to find. A couple of times Janice and I talked about me being her tour manager, but it never came to anything. The problem was Albert Grossman. While I knew that he adored Janice, he was very much in charge of her career and all that she did. He kept a room for Janice at his home in Woodstock, as he'd done for Bob Dylan. I knew that in essence I'd be working for Albert Grossman and answerable to him, not to Janice. Albert was managing Peter, Paul and Mary, Paul Butterfield, Bob Dylan and the band, and had an industry reputation for being one tough cookie. I didn't need the hassle of having to deal with such a man. In any case, Janice was, I knew, a handful on the road. She was into all kinds of heavy drugs, and I was over that scene. I'd just done a chaotic tour with the Stones, and I was looking for something a bit more fun, and I wanted to have a holiday. So while we remained friends, I never got to work directly for Janice, although we were subsequently together in Canada on the tour, the great train tour that we did in Canada. In less than a year, Janice was to die tragically on the road of an overdose. She was no typical beauty, though she had a smile as wide as the Golden Gate Bridge and was just as beautiful. When she smiled, she was radiant, genuine and open. I sometimes used to think Janice would have been happiest on the back of some big old biker's hog, with her hair blowing in the wind and with nothing to do but keep a funky man happy. Free William Frank from the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers would have been perfect for Janice. Unfortunately, he was a character in the comic book. There was a strain of trailer trash vulgarity in her that I never wished to encourage, and I always felt that she was letting herself down when she retreated into crude and belligerent fantasies. Janice would look for an argument, especially if she was bored, and there was no boy around to take her fancy or to allow her to forget about herself. I used to think, who the hell would want to be Janis Joplin, or for that matter, any famous artist? It must be a total drag, and how could you trust people to ignore your fame and the dumb baggage that came with it, and only want you for yourself? At the height of her renown, Janice was smothering the ever-present loneliness with alcohol and drugs. Every day, it is said, the reasonable person begins to hunt for happiness. Janice searched like all of us, and unfortunately, in the end, that elusive human joy seemed to escape her. As the rabbis say, there is nothing more whole than a broken heart. So it's a book. It's a book that tries to do justice to people that I've known and loved, you know, because, you know, when you get to be 70, you look back on your life and you realise, you know, how fortunate you've been, whoever you might be, you know, whether you're a garbage collector in the Bronx or, you know, you're a tour manager or a rock and roll star, whatever. You're lucky to get to 70. Lots of people haven't got to 70, and my book pays tribute to quite a few people now who unfortunately are dead. People who are in the band. Rick Danko was a very dear friend of mine. Pete Ben was a dear friend of mine, and I devote 2 chapters of the book to him. And I think as a writer, one of the things that's a challenge as a writer is to capture somebody that you remember. You know, we all have conversations with people about somebody who died a few years back. And you stand around, excuse me, shoot the shit, you know, about this guy, shoot the breeze, as the Americans say. You know, stand around, talk about this girl or this guy, and you know what I mean, what a great guy he was, and blah, 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 and I remember this and I remember that. But it's quite difficult to actually write something that captures a person. So I've tried to do that about people from Sid Barrett, who died, to Big Ben, to Janis, to Jerry, a lot of different people who I'm sure a lot of us, you know, hold dear to our musical hearts. And what I'd like to do is, because we're running late, I wasn't in charge of this show. If I had been in charge of the show, it wouldn't have been late, I can assure you. Except, funnily enough, I've worked with the Greatful Dead for 4 years, and it was like, getting the Greatful Dead on stage at the right time was like, yeah, forget it, man, you know. I started off being a psychedelic fascist about it all, and I just ended up giving up, you know, saying, okay, well, fuck it, the stage is ready, everything's ready, the lights are ready, the audience is here. Just go ahead when you want, you know. But I must tell you one quite amusing little anecdote about that, because we were on the European tour in 1972. We played in Copenhagen, right, in the Tivoli, which is a famous theatre in a park in the middle of Copenhagen. And Queen Juliana of the Netherlands was on a royal visit to Denmark. So this was a big deal, you know. It was on television, and they were following, you know, the royal progress through the streets of Copenhagen and all that shit. And that was like a 30-minute show. And at the end of that show, they were going to cut live to the Tivoli in Copenhagen for the first ever rock and roll show live on Danish television. So this was a big number. And, you know, it had to be done on time, you know. So there was everybody, I got the troops together, you know, all the band. Everybody understood. By this time we'd been working together for 2 years. Everybody understood that certain shows did have to start on the button, on time, you know, no fucking around. And, you know, everybody would get the 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, go, thing that's necessary for TV. So anyway, a little guy who was going to introduce the Greatful Dead, you know, he practiced and everything. He was going to stand up in Danish, which is a completely incomprehensible language, and kind of go scoldie-gop, 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 go right for a day. And then it would all start, you know, so everyone was primed for it. And I was outside in a giant remote broadcast truck that had all the TV screens in it, and the producers in there, and it was all like big time, watching the Queen of the Netherlands thing, and then it's going to cut over to us. And then they said something like, the Tivoli, and over it came to the Tivoli. And the camera starts going up and down like this. And he's looking for this little guy who's going to say the Grateful Dead, who's behind, like, the back line. That's the back line there. That's about 1/100th of the back line that the Grateful Dead have. Maybe say a 60th, right? So if you imagine a wall of amplifiers, here's a little guy. I have to talk and do this one, sometimes it can be difficult. The wall of amplifiers here, the guy can't see over them. So what's he going to do? You know, the show's coming right now. So he sees a garbage can, he thinks, right, I'll stand on the garbage can. So he grabs his garbage can, dumps it upside down, all the garbage falls out on the stage, stands on the garbage can with his microphone, with the mic in his hand. He's ready to go, I'm in the truck. He's like, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, and on 5, this fist comes through the, like, if you imagine this is the TV screen, and he's standing, a fist comes like this, bang, and the guy goes out off of the screen. The camera's going like this, trying to find where he is. Thank God Garcia saw the whole thing, and Jerry just started playing. Meanwhile, the producer was screaming and yelling. He was of effeminate nature, I must say. But had his head on the control, but that going, I'm ruined, oh God, it's a disaster. Anyway, that was the one time that the Grateful Dead managed to start on time. And the guy who announced it lost 2 teeth. And afterwards, you know, he was very upset. I was talking to him all in the, you know, and I got Parish. I said, what the fuck, Steve? I knew it was Steve had done it, you know. What the fuck? You knocked the announcer out, man. He didn't even make the announcement. I said, hey, man, you know, he took out the garbage can on the stage. I'm not having that. I mean, yeah, well, fair enough, you know. You can't do that. That was the Grateful Dead. So there we are. Not sure what else I should tell you other than bands are really weird. And the Rolling Stones are pretty fucking weird, let me tell you. I'll tell you a strange thing about the Rolling Stones, right, which is, when you think about it, extraordinary. Keith Richards and Bill Wyman didn't talk to one another for 10 years. This is fact. This is absolute fact. They never talked to one another backstage, in buses, cars, aeroplanes, on stage, never. So, you know, Bill told me this, right? He actually told me this, I was sitting with him. And I'm like, really? What the fuck was that about? Guess what? I mean, this just beggars belief for us. This is what happened, right? I said to Bill, well, what the fuck was all that about? I thought, well, I immediately thought, okay, Keith fucked some chick Bill liked, or Bill fucked some chick that Keith liked, or it's one of those numbers, right? So Bill said, I thought Keith didn't like me. I said, what? He said, yeah, I thought Keith didn't like me. And I said, well, what did Keith think? And he said, Keith thought I didn't like him. So for 10 years, these two guys in the biggest fucking rock and roll band in the world didn't talk to one another. To this day I don't understand how they could play together. So there you are. There's some strange stuff that goes on in the music business, and that's some of it. Listen, please feel free. I'm here all evening. If you want to come and buy a book, please do. I'll sign it for you. If you want to come and make points, ask questions, give me a kiss or a cuddle, whatever. I'm up for anything. Lovely talking to you, and I'll be right here. Thanks. Now, over to Madame Charlie.